The night had a strange kind of calm, the kind that felt almost heavy, as if the air itself was waiting for something important to happen. The sky outside the studio lights was a quiet blend of deep blue and fading silver, and inside, the crew moved around with soft footsteps because the final interview for the special was about to begin. Keanu sat on one side of the dimly lit stage, his posture relaxed but his eyes distant, like his mind was caught between past moments he had never spoken about and future consequences he still feared. Sandra had not arrived yet, and even though he kept telling himself he came here just to finish the documentary about their long years in Hollywood, something inside him whispered that this night would become something far more personal than anything captured on camera before. He tapped his fingers lightly on the armrest, a small habit he had whenever he tried to steady emotions he did not want anyone to notice, and he breathed in slowly as he wondered how it would feel finally to say the truth he had carried inside him for so many years. He remembered their early days, when they filmed their first movie together, long before the world imagined them as the pair with the quiet bond that never faded. He remembered how she laughed at small things, how she tilted her head when she listened, how she made every space feel safer without even trying. There had been a moment, a real quiet one, when she sat beside him during a break and told him she felt nervous about a scene, and he had promised her that she would be fine, and there had been a kind of softness in her eyes that stayed with him far after the cameras stopped. But back then, life was moving too fast for both of them, and he convinced himself they worked better as friends, even though a part of him wondered if he was simply afraid to let something deeper grow. Now, years later, sitting under these lights, he felt the weight of everything he had never said pressing close to him, and he knew this night would force him to face a truth he had tried to silence for a long time. The door opened, and Sandra walked in with the gentle kind of grace that always made people in the room go quiet without understanding why. She wore simple clothes, nothing dramatic, but she carried herself with a steady warmth that felt like a small light even in the large studio. When her eyes landed on him, she smiled the same soft smile she had used for years whenever they reunited after long schedules, a smile that always felt like a welcome back home, even though neither of them ever said it out loud. She walked toward him, and he stood up without thinking, because something about her presence always made him feel the urge to meet her halfway. When she reached him, she placed her hand lightly on his arm and said she was glad he was here, her voice calm, but holding something he could not fully read, something that carried years of connection and unspoken feelings they had always kept in the background. They sat down across from each other with a gentle light between them, and the interviewer explained the flow of the questions. The documentary was about long-lasting friendships in Hollywood, about trust, about the kind of respect that survived decades. They would talk about old memories, challenges, rumors, and the quiet loyalty that kept people close even when life moved them in different directions. Sandra nodded while listening, but Keanu felt his attention drifting, because just the thought of sharing memories with her made his chest tighten. He wondered if she could sense how much this conversation would dig into emotions he had carefully locked away. She glanced at him once, as if she picked up the shift in his breathing, and for a second he thought she would ask him if he was all right. But she simply gave him a reassuring look, the same look she used to give him on set when she felt he was overwhelmed by something he did not want to say. The cameras rolled, the lights warmed, and the interview began. Sandra spoke first, describing their first days working together, how they were both young, unsure, and trying to understand the pressure of the industry. Her voice was calm, steady, filled with gentle humor, and he could tell she remembered everything with the same affection he carried. She mentioned how he used to sit quietly in the corner reading, and he laughed softly when she teased that she always wondered how someone could be so mysterious and still so easy to trust. Keanu added his stories, describing her kindness on set, how she lifted spirits without effort, how she made people feel seen. As they spoke, the room felt smaller, like the years between them folded into a single moment, and every memory they shared carried hints of emotions that neither of them named but both clearly felt. But then, halfway through the interview, something shifted. The interviewer brought up a question about regrets, about moments in life when someone wished they had said something or taken a step they were too afraid to take. Sandra looked at Keanu with curiosity, waiting to see how he would answer, and he felt a kind of tremor inside him that he tried to hide. The interviewer asked him directly if there was anything he wished he had said to Sandra all those years ago, something he held back because of timing, fear, or uncertainty. The question hung in the air, heavy, quiet, waiting. Sandra leaned forward slightly, her expression soft but serious, and Keanu felt like the world stopped narrowing until there was only her face, her eyes, and all the years of silence between them. He opened his mouth, thinking he would give a safe answer, something simple, something carefully shaped to avoid revealing too much. But instead, his voice cracked a little, not loud, but enough for Sandra to notice, enough for her eyes to widen with a kind of surprised confusion. He tried to look away, but found he could not. The truth was rising too quickly, too sharply, pushing against the walls he had built around it. He took a slow breath, his hands trembling slightly on his lap, and he said that sometimes there were things he wished he had said long before, things he buried because he thought it was better to protect their friendship than to risk losing it. The interviewer leaned in, sensing something deeper happening, but Sandra's eyes never left him. She whispered his name, so softly that it almost broke him, and asked what he meant, her voice trembling like she already feared the answer. The truth slipped out before he could stop it. He said he cared for her in a way he never admitted, that there were days when he wanted to tell her that she meant more to him than he could explain, that he had feelings he never expressed because he was afraid of ruining the quiet bond that brought peace to both of their lives. He said it all in a low voice, steady but full of emotion that made the room fall silent in a way he had never experienced before. Sandra's lips parted, her eyes blinking slowly as she tried to process the words she never expected to hear from him after so many years of familiar comfort. Her breath grew unsteady, and she looked down for a moment, as if she felt something inside her break open in a way she had carefully avoided for years. When she finally looked up, her voice was unsteady. She whispered that she never knew he felt that way, and for a moment her throat tightened so much she struggled to speak. She placed her hand gently against her chest, and tears slowly gathered in her eyes, not dramatic but quiet, honest, raw. She told him that she always wondered if he saw her the way she saw him, but she never asked because she believed the timing was never right, and she feared he would pull away if she said something at the wrong moment. She let out a breath that shook, and her voice cracked as she admitted that hearing him say these things now stirred emotions she thought she had buried long ago. The crew stood still, unsure whether to keep filming or stop, because the moment felt too real, too vulnerable, too delicate to interrupt. Keanu leaned forward, trying to understand the emotion in her eyes, but before he could speak again, something in Sandra's expression changed, something deep and complicated, like she remembered something important that kept her from responding the way she wanted. Her gaze moved away from him for just a second, and he felt a sudden tension in the air, a heaviness that wrapped around her like a shadow. He sensed there was something she wanted to say, something she had been holding inside just like him, but fear or guilt or some hidden truth kept her from letting it out. He whispered her name again, gently, trying to reach her, but she swallowed hard and glanced toward the interviewer as if trying to steady herself. Her hands trembled slightly, and she looked back at Keanu with a softness mixed with pain. She opened her mouth, ready to say something that seemed heavy, something that might change everything between them in an instant. She whispered that there was something she needed to tell him too, something she never had the courage to say because she feared it would change the way he saw her forever. Her voice shook so much that Keanu felt a chill run down his spine, because he knew whatever she was about to reveal carried a weight she had been holding alone for a long time. He reached out slowly, his hand brushing against hers, not tightly, just enough to let her know he was there and not going anywhere. And then, just as she took a trembling breath to finally reveal her secret, the studio lights flickered, and a voice from behind the cameras suddenly cut in, calling for an emergency stop to the recording. Something urgent had happened outside, something that required Sandra immediately, something she could not ignore. She froze, her unfinished confession hanging in the air, her eyes full of fear, guilt, and something Keanu could not yet name. She looked at him with an expression that felt like an apology mixed with desperation, and before he could ask what was wrong, she whispered that she would explain everything later. But the way she said it made him feel that whatever she was hiding might change, everything he thought he understood about her. And with that, she stood up quickly, wiped her eyes, and rushed toward the exit, leaving Keanu staring after her with a heart full of questions and a fear he had not expected to feel. The door closed behind her, and the silence she left behind felt like the beginning of something deep and uncertain, something that might test everything between them. And that was how part one ended, with Keanu sitting alone, wondering what truth she carried that was powerful enough to break her voice and pull her away before she could speak it. The studio felt strangely empty after Sandra rushed out, even though the crew was still there packing equipment and lowering lights. Keanu stood motionless for a long moment, staring at the doorway she had disappeared through. He tried to breathe steadily, but every slow inhale felt tight, as if the air itself had grown thicker. He didn't know whether to follow her or give her space, and that uncertainty left him standing in a quiet tension that wrapped around his chest. He replayed her expression over and over, the way her voice trembled, the way her eyes held a mixture of fear and longing, the way she had said she needed to tell him something important. The emotions swirling inside him felt heavier with every passing second, and he found himself sinking into a mixture of worry, confusion, and a strange kind of hope he fought hard to understand. A member of the crew approached him gently and told him Sandra received an urgent phone call. They didn't know what it was about, only that it came suddenly, and she reacted as if it was something she couldn't ignore. Keanu nodded quietly, though the explanation did nothing to ease the unease inside him. He thanked them softly and walked out of the studio into the hallway, where the night air from outside seeped through a slightly open back door. He leaned against the wall, placing one hand on his forehead as he tried to calm the storm inside him. He wondered whether he had pushed too far, whether his confession had triggered something painful for her. He didn't know if it was about him or something from her past that she had kept hidden, and not knowing made the silence feel even heavier. He stepped outside into the cool night air, hoping the breeze would settle his thoughts. The city lights shimmered in the distance, and the usual hum of the streets felt strangely muted. He walked slowly toward the parking lot, each step heavy with unanswered questions. He paused near his motorcycle, gripping the handlebars tightly as he lowered his head. He felt a growing fear that her sudden departure wasn't just about the urgent call, it was tied to the confession he had never planned to make. He whispered her name under his breath, letting the sound drift into the night, hoping somehow it would bring him clarity. He sat down on the edge of the curb, elbows resting on his knees, and tried to make sense of the look she gave him before leaving. It wasn't rejection. It wasn't anger. It was something deeper, something tangled with fear and longing. He remembered the slight tremble in her voice when she said she had something she needed to confess to. The thought that she carried her own hidden feelings shook him more than he wanted to admit. Yet something in her eyes suggested that whatever she had been holding in wasn't simple. It was layered with a past he didn't fully understand. Maybe she had loved someone and lost them. Maybe she feared opening her heart again. Maybe she was afraid of how the world would react. Maybe there was some pain she never shared with anyone. He sat there for almost 30 minutes before finally deciding to drive home. He didn't want to overwhelm her with messages or calls while she was handling something urgent. He knew Sandra well enough to understand she would reach out when she could. So he rode through the quiet roads, the wind brushing against his face, but even the familiar comfort of riding couldn't ease the tension inside him. When he reached home, he took off his helmet slowly, walked inside, and sat on the couch without turning on any lights. The dim glow from the city outside filtered through his windows, casting soft shadows across the room. He placed his phone on the table in front of him and stared at it, expecting it to vibrate any moment with a call or message from her. But minutes passed, then half an hour, then an hour, and nothing came. He leaned back, running his fingers through his hair, trying not to fall into the old habit of assuming the worst. He wasn't angry, he wasn't upset. He was simply scared because the truth she almost revealed seemed like something that carried real emotional weight. By the time he finally lay down on the couch, exhaustion pulled at him, but sleep refused to stay. He closed his eyes and listened to the soft hum of the refrigerator in the background, the subtle hum of the city outside, the quietness that wrapped around him. But every sound only reminded him of her voice cracking under the weight of unsaid words. He drifted in and out of sleep, his mind replaying the moment again and again, until early morning light started creeping into the room. He woke to a soft buzz. His heart jumped as he reached for his phone, expecting Sandra's name on the screen, but the message wasn't from her. It was from the documentary director, checking whether he was all right and informing him that filming would resume the following week. Keanu typed a polite response, then stared at his phone again, still nothing from her. The day passed slowly. He tried reading, but his mind couldn't settle. He tried practicing guitar, but his fingers felt too tense to play anything properly. He sat on his balcony for a while, watching people walk by, wondering how the world could continue moving so calmly when everything inside him felt uncertain. Every time his phone buzzed with a notification that wasn't her, he felt a dull ache in his chest. He didn't expect her to confess anything back. He didn't expect her to have the same feelings. He just wanted to know she was okay. By late afternoon, he finally received a message, but not the one he wanted. It was from her assistant, saying Sandra needed a few days to handle something personal and wouldn't be available. Keanu stared at the message for a long time before finally setting the phone down. He stood up and walked into his kitchen, taking slow breaths. He felt a kind of helplessness that pushed against his ribs, an ache that came from caring deeply for someone who was struggling but refusing to burden others. He whispered softly to himself that she would reach out when she was ready. He trusted her. He always did. But the silence between them grew heavier with every hour. Later that night, he finally decided he couldn't just sit still anymore. He grabbed his keys and a light jacket and left his house. He didn't know where he was going at first, but his instincts pulled him toward a quiet place he often went to when he needed clarity. It was an old overlook on the edge of the city, where the lights from the buildings shimmered like a sea of quiet possibilities. He parked his motorcycle and sat on the railing, letting the cold air brush against his skin. He closed his eyes and tried to steady his breathing. As he sat there in the silence, he found himself thinking back to the early years of his friendship with Sandra. He remembered the way she laughed during breaks on set, the way she comforted him when he felt overwhelmed by the industry, the way her presence could turn even a tiring day into something warm. He remembered her kindness, her sarcasm, her honesty, and her ability to make people feel understood. He remembered the small moments, moments so subtle and gentle that they stayed with him for years. Moments he didn't recognize as love until it was already too late. He wondered if she remembered those moments too. He wondered if they held the same weight for her. He wondered if she ever felt her heart tighten around him the way his tightened around her. The more he thought, the more he realized how deeply she was woven into his life, even in the spaces where he pretended she was. As he turned to leave, his phone buzzed again. This time, when he saw her name on the screen, his breath caught. He opened the message quickly. "Can we talk soon? I'm sorry for yesterday. I didn't mean to leave like that." That was all she wrote, just one sentence filled with hesitation but also hope. He typed back instantly. "I'm always here, whenever you're ready." He waited for a response, but none came. Still, something felt lighter inside him. At least she didn't vanish behind silence. At least she reached out. The next morning arrived with a soft sunlight that filtered through thin clouds. Keanu made coffee but barely touched it. He paced around his living room, stopping every few minutes to glance at his phone. He wasn't impatient, just concerned. He knew Sandra well enough to understand she would only ask to talk if she was ready to face whatever truth she had been carrying. He wanted to support her without pressuring her. Finally, around noon, she texted again. "Can you come over?" His heart jolted. He replied immediately. "Yes, I'll be there in 30 minutes. The drive to her house felt longer than it actually was. He parked outside, took a moment to steady himself, then walked to her door. Before he could knock, she opened it slowly. She looked tired, her eyes slightly red as if she hadn't slept much. She forced a small smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Hey," she whispered. "Hey," he replied gently. She stepped aside to let him in, and he entered her quiet home. He noticed the subtle changes in her posture, the tension in her shoulders, the unease in her breathing. She led him to her living room and sat down on the couch, folding her hands together tightly. He sat across from her, giving her space but also showing he was fully present. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence felt thick, filled with everything they left unsaid. Sandra took a slow breath and lifted her gaze to meet his. "I wanted to tell you what happened yesterday," she began softly, "but I didn't know how to say it without breaking down." He leaned forward slightly, his expression warm and steady. "You can tell me anything," he said quietly. Her eyes softened at his words. She nodded slowly, though her hands trembled again. "I wasn't just reacting to your confession," she whispered. "Something else happened, something I wasn't prepared for." She paused, her breath catching. He felt the tension rise sharply in the room. "Sandra, what happened?" he asked carefully. She swallowed hard and looked down. "I got a call," she said slowly, "from someone I haven't heard from in years, someone who knows something about my past that I never told anyone, not even you." A deep quiet filled the room. Keanu felt his heartbeat slow, then speed up, then settle into a heavy rhythm. He understood instantly that whatever she was about to reveal wasn't simple. It wasn't something small or casual. It was something she had buried so deeply that even thinking about it hurt her. He whispered her name gently. "Take your time." She looked at him with eyes full of guilt, sadness, and fear. "Yesterday, when you told me how you felt, it woke up things inside me that I didn't expect," she said. "But it also brought back memories I've been avoiding for years. Things I should have told you long ago. She pressed her hand to her chest, her voice trembling. I need to tell you the truth, she whispered, but I don't know how you'll see me after I say it. Keanu shook his head slowly, his voice strong but soft. Nothing you say will make me see you differently. Her eyes filled with tears at those words. She looked away, trying to steady her breathing, and for a moment she fought a battle inside herself so deep that Keanu could see the strain in her expression. Then she finally looked at him again. And just as she opened her mouth to reveal the truth, someone knocked on her front door. The sound was sharp, sudden, and unexpected. Sandra's entire body froze. Her breath caught. Her eyes widened with fear. She whispered in a broken voice, "It's him." Keanu felt his heart stop. Because he knew. Whoever stood on the other side of that door was connected to the secret she had buried for years. And she was terrified of facing him. The knock came again, louder this time. Sandra whispered shakily, "Keanu, I don't know what's going to happen if I open that door." The knock echoed through the quiet house again, sharper this time, as if the person on the other side grew impatient or desperate. Sandra's breath trembled and she instinctively took a step back, her shoulders tightening as fear swept across her face. Keanu watched her closely, his heart pounding as he tried to make sense of the fear in her eyes. He had never seen her look this shaken. She had survived the hardest moments of Hollywood, public scrutiny, heartbreak, personal loss, and still managed to walk with grace. But now, in her living room, with a single knock on her door, she looked as if she might collapse under the weight of something too heavy to carry alone. Keanu stood up slowly, every muscle alert as he positioned himself between her and the door. He didn't touch her yet, not wanting to add pressure, but his presence alone shifted the tension in the room. She stared at the door with wide eyes, her hands trembling as she held them close to her chest. He whispered her name softly, trying to bring her back into the moment. "Sandra, who is it?" She shook her head quickly, her breathing uneven. "I'll explain, just not yet," she whispered. "I didn't think he would come here, not today, not after all these years." Another knock hit the door, this time louder, almost impatient, and Sandra jumped slightly at the sound. Keanu moved a little nearer to her, his tone low and steady. "You don't have to open it. We don't even have to talk to him. You're not alone." Her eyes softened at his words, but they still reflected terror, terror not of the person himself, but of what his presence represented. She finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "He knows." Keanu's chest tightened. "Knows what?" he asked gently. She swallowed hard, her lips trembling. "The truth I was going to tell you," she whispered. Before he could ask anything more, the person outside called her name. Not angrily, not harshly, but with a firmness that made her close her eyes in pain. "Sandra, I know you're in there. Please, I just need to talk to you." She covered her face briefly with her hands, whispering something too soft for Keanu to hear. He stepped closer and placed his hand lightly on her shoulder, a silent reminder that he was there. She lowered her hands slowly, breathing deeply as if gathering courage she wasn't sure she had. The knock came again. Keanu spoke calmly. "Do you want me to open it?" She shook her head immediately. "No, not yet," she said quickly. "I need a minute." She turned away, walking slowly toward the window, trying to calm the storm inside her. Keanu watched her, trying to understand the layers of pain in her expression. Whatever she had kept inside for years was pushing its way into the light, whether she was ready or not. After a long moment, she looked back at him with a mixture of apology and fear. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "This is probably so confusing for you." He stepped toward her, his voice gentle but steady. "I'm not confused about one thing," he said. "You're scared, and I don't care who's outside that door. I'm not letting you face him alone." Her eyes glossed with tears, and she inhaled sharply, struggling to hold herself together. "Please don't leave," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere," he replied quietly. The knock came again, but this time softer, more hesitant, and for a moment even Sandra looked surprised. "Sandra, it's been too long," the man said through the door. "I didn't come here to hurt you, I promise." Her breath caught. Keanu studied her reaction carefully. "Who is he?" he asked gently. Her eyes lowered, her voice almost a whisper. "Someone from my past, Someone I thought would never show up again, someone who was there before I ever met you. Keanu stayed quiet, giving her space. She took a deep, shaky breath. I didn't tell you because, if you knew, you might look at me differently, she said. He shook his head, his voice firm but tender. I already told you, nothing you say will change that. She gave him a fragile smile, but her fear didn't fade. Finally, she wiped her cheeks and nodded. Okay, she whispered. I'll open it, but stay close. He nodded without hesitation. She walked slowly toward the door, every step heavy with dread. She paused with her hand on the doorknob, closing her eyes as if summoning the strength of years she spent holding herself together. Keanu moved to stand beside her, not blocking her but supporting her, grounding her. She opened the door. A man in his late 40s stood on the porch, his expression tense but not hostile. He looked exhausted, like someone who had been carrying his own burdens for a long time. He wasn't a stranger to her. She recognized him instantly, and the recognition broke through her composure. Her eyes softened with pain and her breath trembled. Hi, Sandra, he said quietly. Her voice cracked. Michael. Keanu's eyes flicked between them, sensing the gravity of the moment. Michael looked at Keanu briefly, as if trying to understand who he was, but his focus returned quickly to Sandra. I'm sorry to show up like this, Michael said, but I didn't know what else to do. Sandra stepped back slightly, not inviting him inside yet. The space between them felt dense with stories Keanu didn't know but could feel pressing against the air. Why now, she whispered. After all these years, why come now? Michael lowered his gaze. Because the truth is coming out whether we face it or not, he said quietly, and you deserve to hear it from me. Keanu's pulse quickened. Sandra's hands shook violently now, and he gently touched her arm to steady her. Michael noticed the gesture, his eyes flickering with a mixture of understanding and sadness. I didn't know you'd have someone with you, Michael said softly. Sandra wiped her face and whispered, He's not just someone. Michael nodded, respecting the boundary she perfectly drew. Keanu finally spoke, his voice calm but protective. Is there a reason you're here? Because she's clearly overwhelmed. Michael nodded slowly. I know, he said, and I'm sorry for that, but she needs to hear what I have to say. It's about her past, and about someone she lost. Sandra's breath caught sharply, and tears rushed into her eyes again. Keanu felt his stomach twist. Lost, he echoed quietly. Sandra stepped forward, whispering sharply toward Michael. Stop, please, not like this. Michael's voice softened. You can't run from it anymore. Keanu looked at Sandra, confused and concerned. Sandra, what is he talking about? Her lips trembled violently. She whispered, I didn't want you to know like this. I was going to tell you myself. Keanu felt his heart drop, but he kept his voice calm. Tell me what? She closed her eyes, tears falling despite her effort to stay composed. Michael stepped toward her, not aggressively, but with a sadness that carried years behind it. He deserves to know, Michael said softly. Sandra looked at Keanu with a raw kind of pain that made his chest ache. Years ago, she whispered, her voice breaking, before I met you, before my life changed, I had someone I cared about deeply, someone I loved, someone I lost in a way that broke a part of me I never healed. Her knees buckled slightly, and Keanu caught her arm to steady her. She took a shaky breath. I never told you, because I didn't want you to see me as someone broken. Keanu shook his head immediately, his voice steady but full of emotion. You're not broken. Michael exhaled deeply, stepping back slightly as if giving them space. Sandra looked down, tears dripping onto the floor. I lost someone I was supposed to build a life with, she whispered, and Michael was there when it happened. Keanu's breath slowed. Not jealousy. Not confusion. Just deep, aching empathy for the pain she clearly carried. He whispered, Sandra, why didn't you ever tell me? She wiped her cheeks and whispered back. Because whenever I looked at you, I felt peace, and I didn't want my past pain to touch that. Michael cleared his throat softly. There's more she hasn't told you, he said gently. Sandra looked panicked. Michael, please. Michael's voice softened even more. It's not to hurt you, it's to free you. Keanu looked at Sandra with steady eyes. Whatever it is, I'm here, he said quietly, and I'm not leaving. She let out a shaky, trembling breath. Michael looked between them, then said something that made the air freeze. The person she lost didn't just leave her with grief. He left her with a secret, one she's been carrying alone for years. Keanu felt a chill crawl up his spine. Sandra pressed her hands to her mouth, tears pouring faster now. Michael, don't, she whispered. He deserves to know, Michael repeated softly. Keanu stepped closer to her, gently pulling her hands away from her face. Sandra, look at me. She lifted her gaze slowly, her eyes drowning in fear and vulnerability. Whatever it is, he whispered, you don't have to be afraid, just tell me. Her lips parted. Her voice trembled. Keanu, the person I lost. She paused, her throat tightening as she tried to force out the words. Michael stepped back, giving her the space to speak. Sandra shook her head, unable to breathe for a moment. And then, with a shattering breath, she whispered, he didn't just leave me behind, he left me with a child. Keanu felt the world tilt. The room spun. Her tears fell harder. And nothing in his life prepared him for what she said next. And no one, not the public, not my friends, not even you knows the child ever existed, the child she never spoke about. Silence filled the room the moment Sandra's confession left her lips, and that silence felt heavier than anything Keanu had ever experienced. It wasn't the quiet of confusion or shock alone. It was the quiet of a truth so deeply buried that speaking it aloud seemed to shake the ground beneath them. Sandra stood trembling near the doorway, her hands shaking so hard she clutched the side of the wall for support. The tears streaming down her face weren't loud or dramatic, just steady, raw, and full of years of grief she had never allowed herself to release. Keanu stared at her, his breath caught in his chest, not because he judged her, but because the weight of her pain hit him with a force he did not expect. Michael lowered his gaze, giving her a moment to breathe. He didn't look angry or triumphant for revealing the truth. He looked heartbroken for her, as if he had witnessed too much of her suffering and finally reached a point where keeping the secret felt like another wound pressed against her soul. Keanu took a slow step toward Sandra, his voice barely above a whisper. A child, he said gently, making sure he didn't raise his voice even a little, afraid she might break further if she felt cornered. Sandra pressed her hand over her mouth as another wave of emotion rushed through her. She nodded slowly, her breathing uneven and shallow. I had a baby, she whispered. Years before anyone knew me, before my career took off, before the world watched everything I did. Her voice cracked as she said the next part. And I lost him. Keanu's chest tightened until it hurt. He felt the pain of her confession like a strike he never saw coming. He had known she carried deep grief, everyone who knew her sensed that she had lived through more than she ever spoke about. But he had never imagined this. Not a child, not a secret love, not a heartbreak so deep she buried it beneath years of silence. He moved closer again, slowly, giving her time to stop him if she needed space. But she didn't pull away. Instead, she let her forehead drop into her hands, shoulders shaking quietly. Keanu gently placed his hand on her back, offering support without forcing anything. She trembled beneath his touch but didn't move away. Michael stepped back, allowing them the space they needed. He finally spoke, his voice deep and heavy. She was so young, he said softly. Too young to face what she faced, and the father, he wasn't what she thought he was. Sandra squeezed her eyes shut, her breath hitching. Please don't, she whispered painfully to Michael. I don't want him to hate me for hiding it. Keanu shook his head immediately. I could never hate you, he said, his voice steady and warm. Not now, not ever. She looked up at him then, tears streaming, eyes wide with fear and disbelief. Even after knowing I lied for so long, she asked, her voice trembling. You didn't lie, he said softly. You survived, and you protected your heart the only way you knew how. Her lips parted in a small, broken breath, and she felt herself fall into tears again. Keanu turned to Michael. Tell me what happened, he said quietly, only if she's okay with it. Sandra wiped her face slowly with trembling hands. She took in a deep breath, nodded reluctantly, and whispered, He can explain the part I can't. Michael hesitated for a moment, then spoke gently. Sandra met someone when she was barely out of her teens, someone she trusted. He made her believe they had a future together. She loved him deeply. She believed in him, and they had a child, her son. Keanu felt something inside him twist painfully. But, Michael continued, the father wasn't ready to commit. He left before the baby was even born. Sandra took a shaky breath and whispered, I thought he'd come back. I thought he'd see his baby and want to stay, but he never came. Keanu clenched his jaw softly, not from judgment, but from the heartbreak of knowing she went through all of this alone. Michael added quietly, I was her friend back then. I tried to help, but Sandra wouldn't let many people in. She was scared. She didn't have family who could support her, and she didn't have enough money to raise a child alone. Sandra looked away, guilt flooding her expression. I did everything I could, she whispered. I worked, I struggled, I sacrificed. I held him every night and told him I would give him everything, and for a while I thought I could. Keanu's voice softened even more. What happened to him? Sandra inhaled sharply, and the pain on her face told him the answer before she said a word. He got sick, she whispered. So fast, so unexpectedly, and I didn't have enough money for proper treatment. I tried everything. I begged, I borrowed. I worked around the clock, but he slipped away in my arms before I could save him. A sob escaped her lips, not loud but deep, guttural, filled with the kind of grief that reshapes a person forever. She covered her mouth, ashamed of the sound. Keanu quickly stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her, pulling her gently but firmly into his chest. She collapsed into him like someone who had been holding herself together for too long and suddenly had permission to fall apart. Her tears soaked into his shirt, but he didn't care. He held her as if nothing else in the world mattered. He stroked her back gently, calming her, grounding her. I'm so sorry, he whispered into her hair. I'm so sorry you went through that alone. Her voice came out broken. I didn't want anyone to know, not because I was ashamed of him, never because of him, but because I failed him. I couldn't save him. Keanu pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, his hands on either side of her face. You did not fail him, he said firmly but gently. You loved him, you fought for him, that is not failure. She shook her head, tears falling harder. But I couldn't bring him into the world I dreamed of giving him. I couldn't give him a father. I couldn't give him security. I couldn't even give him time. Keanu felt his own eyes sting. You gave him the most important thing, he whispered. A mother who loved him with everything she had. Sandra's lips trembled, and she leaned forward, resting her forehead against his chest again, her arms wrapped so tightly around him he felt the intensity of her heartbreak through every part of her. Keanu held her there, refusing to let go. After a long moment, she finally pulled away slightly, wiping her face with shaking hands. I hid the story, she whispered. I hid it from the public because I couldn't relive it, and I hid it from you because whenever I was around you, I felt light again. I didn't want to bring my darkness into your world. Keanu shook his head slowly, brushing a tear from her cheek. You don't burden me, he said softly. You never have, you never will. She breathed unsteadily, her eyes swimming with gratitude and disbelief. But when you told me how you felt, she whispered, it woke up all the fears I shoved away. I felt something inside me that I haven't felt in years, warmth, hope, and that terrified me because loving someone again means risking everything again. Keanu swallowed gently and whispered back, I'm not asking you to risk anything. I'm asking you to trust me, to let me stand beside you in whatever you're carrying. She looked down, overwhelmed. Michael, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke again. There's something else Sandra needs to know, he said gently. Something she hasn't learned yet, and it's why I came today. Sandra stiffened slightly. Keanu's eyes narrowed in concern. Michael continued, his tone careful. The father, the one who left, he reached out, after all these years. Sandra's breath froze. Keanu felt his stomach drop. Why? Sandra whispered, her voice weak. Michael handed her a small envelope. He sent this, Michael said softly, and he asked me to deliver it to you personally. Sandra stared at the envelope as if it might hurt her just by touching it. Her hands shook violently as she reached for it but hesitated halfway. Keanu gently placed his hand beneath hers, steadying the tremble in her fingers. Together, they held the envelope. She whispered, I don't know if I can open it. Keanu spoke softly. You don't have to open anything alone. She looked at him with eyes full of fear, pain, and something fragile, trust trying to be reborn. After a very long moment, she inhaled deeply and slid her finger beneath the seal. Inside was only one thing. A letter. She unfolded it slowly, the paper trembling in her hands. As she read the first few lines, her face drained of color. Keanu felt panic rise inside him. Sandra, what does it say? Her eyes filled with tears that weren't like the others. These were deeper, sharper, almost frightening. She whispered in a trembling voice that barely held together. He says, our son didn't die the way I thought. Keanu froze. Michael closed his eyes, looking pained. Sandra's voice cracked completely as she whispered the final line. He says there is something I never knew, something about that day. And her knees buckled. Keanu caught her instantly the truth inside the letter. When Sandra collapsed against Keanu, her body trembling and weak, he held her firmly but gently, guiding her to the couch before she could stumble. The letter slipped from her hands and fluttered to the floor, landing face up like a quiet threat neither of them was ready to face. Sandra pressed her hands against her face, as if blocking out the world was the only way to keep herself from falling apart completely. Keanu knelt in front of her, his heart pounding not just from fear but from the unbearable weight of seeing her shattered in a way he had never witnessed before. He waited for her to breathe, to calm, to find even a small thread of strength inside the wreckage of her unraveling emotions. Michael stepped back, hands in his pockets, eyes lowered with a sorrow that suggested he had been carrying this truth longer than he wanted. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to speak. He simply waited, giving her space to process what she had read. The silence stretched thin across the room, heavy and fragile like glass ready to crack under the slightest touch. Keanu gently took Sandra's hands away from her face, his voice low and warm. It's all right, he whispered. I'm here, you're safe. She opened her eyes, and the pain inside them struck him like a blade. Tears streamed silently down her cheeks, not with the raw sobbing of earlier, but with a hollow grief that spoke of a wound reopening after years of being sealed shut. She took a shaky breath and whispered, I don't understand. I don't understand any of it. Keanu rubbed her arm softly. Then we'll understand it together, he said. You don't have to deal with this alone. Her lips trembled, and she nodded weakly, grateful for the quiet strength he poured into every word. She leaned forward slightly, drawing in a deep, unsteady breath as she looked down at the letter on the floor. I can't read it again, she whispered. I don't think I can say the words out loud without breaking. Keanu reached for the letter carefully, but before opening it, he glanced at her. Sandra, do you want me to read it? He asked softly. She hesitated, fear tightening her features, but then she nodded with a small movement. Yes, she whispered, just please don't let go of my hand. He took her hand gently in his, then opened the letter with his free hand. The paper was slightly worn, as if the writer had hesitated too long before sending it. Keanu began reading silently at first, his eyes moving slowly across each line. His expression tightened the further he read. His breathing grew heavier. Sandra watched him anxiously, searching his face for answers. Finally, he lowered the letter slowly and looked at her with a quiet heaviness. Sandra, he whispered, there's something you need to hear, something he explains in this letter, something none of us knew. Her breath caught again. What did he say? She whispered. Keanu took a slow breath, choosing his words carefully. He says that your son didn't die because you couldn't afford treatment, he said. Her entire body froze. Keanu squeezed her hand gently, grounding her. He says, Keanu continued softly, that your son's condition was misdiagnosed, that the hospital handled his case poorly, and that the father found out years later after it was already too late. Sandra's lips parted, but no sound came. She blinked as if trying to force the world to stop spinning. Misdiagnosed, she whispered. They told me he was too sick. They said there was nothing I could have done. Keanu nodded painfully. According to the letter, he said, they made mistakes, serious ones, and the hospital covered them. Sandra's breath shattered into a sob as she pressed her hand against her chest, her heart aching so fiercely she felt she might collapse again. No, she whispered. No, it can't be. I blamed myself for years. I thought if I'd been stronger, if I'd worked harder, if I'd gotten him help sooner, he might have lived. Keanu moved closer and wrapped his arms carefully around her. You didn't fail him, he whispered. You never did. You loved him. You fought for him. They are the ones who failed, not you. Sandra clung to him, her tears soaking into his shirt once again, but this time the grief felt different, deeper, sharper, tinged with a betrayal she never imagined. He held her tight, refusing to let go as she trembled against him. Michael finally spoke from across the room. There's more, he said softly. Keanu looked at Sandra, silently asking if she was ready for more. She wiped her face slowly, her breathing uneven, but she nodded weakly. Keanu picked up the letter again and continued reading the next section. He says he found out about the mistakes after your son passed, Keanu said quietly. But by then, you had already moved away, changed your number, and cut ties with everyone from that time in your life. He spent years trying to find you, but he didn't have the right information. Sandra closed her eyes, tears slipping through her lashes. I left because I couldn't breathe, she whispered. Every place reminded me of him, every person asked questions, every noise felt like it echoed inside the emptiness he left behind. Keanu nodded. He understood grief, understood running when you don't know how to heal. But there's something else, Keanu said, hesitating slightly. Sandra opened her eyes slowly. What? She whispered. Keanu looked down at the letter, then back up at her. He says, Keanu began carefully, that when he learned the truth about your son, he decided to keep searching, not to hurt you, but because there was one last detail you never knew. Sandra swallowed hard. Keanu's voice softened. Your son didn't pass in your arms the way you thought. Her entire body tensed. What do you mean? She whispered, her voice cracking. Keanu exhaled slowly. The father wrote that the hospital misinterpreted your son's final moments, he said, and that your son had something to say before he passed. Sandra stared at him in utter disbelief, shaking her head slowly. No, he was too weak. He couldn't speak. He could. Keanu shook his head softly. The letter says he whispered something, he said gently. Something the nurse on duty heard, something the father learned only years later. Sandra leaned forward, gripping the edge of the couch with shaking hands. What did he say? She whispered. Keanu held her gaze, his voice tender. He said your name, Keanu whispered. He said Mom, and he said he loved you. Sandra gasped as if someone had struck her with a force that knocked the breath out of her lungs. She covered her mouth with both hands, sobbing into them, her entire body shaking with grief that broke open like a wound that never healed properly. Keanu immediately pulled her into his arms again, holding her as she cried uncontrollably, her tears falling like years of pain finally breaking free. He loved you, Keanu whispered again and again. He loved you, Sandra. He knew you loved him. He knew you did everything you could. She sobbed harder, gripping Keanu's shirt as if she was afraid the truth might disappear if she let go. She had carried guilt for so many years, silently believing she had failed her child, believing she had not done enough. Knowing her son whispered love for her in his final breath shattered her in a different way, both painful and healing. Michael stepped closer, placing the last piece of the truth gently into the open. That's why his father came back, Michael said quietly. Not to reopen old wounds, not to hurt you, but to give you the peace you never received. Sandra cried until her voice was hoarse, until her tears slowed into quiet tremors. Keanu held her through every moment, refusing to let her sit in pain alone. She finally leaned back slightly, still clinging to his arms, her breathing ragged but more controlled. Why now? She finally whispered. Why after so many years would he bring me this? Michael sighed, his expression gentle. Because he's sick, Michael said softly. And he doesn't have much time. He wanted to give you closure before he's gone too. Sandra stared at him, stunned. Keanu squeezed her hand gently. You don't have to see him, Keanu said softly. You don't owe him anything. Sandra lowered her head, thinking through a storm of emotions. Grief, anger, fear, confusion, and something else deeper. I don't know if I can face him, she whispered. I don't know if I want to remember that part of my life. Keanu nodded. You don't have to decide now, he said. You can take your time. She looked up at him with tired eyes. Why are you being so kind? She whispered. After everything I hid, after everything I buried, after everything I didn't tell you, why do you still sit here with me?" Keanu reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. "Because I care about you," he whispered. "Because I always have, because nothing you carry makes you unworthy of love or understanding, because you should never have held this pain alone." Sandra looked at him, overwhelmed by emotion. And then, very slowly, she whispered something she had never said before. "Keanu, I'm scared that if I let you stay close, I'll lose you too." He took her hand in both of his. "You're not losing me," he whispered. "I'm right here." Before either of them could say another word, Michael glanced at the window and stiffened. Then he turned to Sandra, his voice low. "There's something I didn't tell you," he said, "about your son's father." Sandra froze. Keanu's hand tightened around hers. Michael took a slow breath. "He's not the only one from your past," he said carefully. "And the other person, the one who helped cover the truth, they know you're reconnecting with me." Sandra felt her blood run cold. Michael's next words chilled the room to silence. "And they're coming here, the person from her past." The room grew heavy with fear the moment Michael spoke those last words. Sandra stiffened, her fingers gripping Keanu's hand so tightly it made his own knuckles pale. The air felt charged still, as if even the walls were listening. Keanu looked between Michael and Sandra, trying to understand the full weight of what was coming, but when he saw the panic rising in her eyes, something inside him shifted. He wasn't just concerned anymore. He was protective in a way he had never felt before, as if every piece of her pain had wrapped itself around his heart and left him unwilling to let anything harm her again. Sandra swallowed hard, her voice trembling. Who is coming?" she whispered, her breath thin, barely there. Michael hesitated, running a hand across his forehead as if searching for the right words. He glanced at the window again, then back at her. "Her name is Claire," Michael said quietly. "She was the nurse on duty when your son passed." Sandra stared at him in shock, her mouth parting, her breath catching. "Claire," she whispered. "No, no. She moved away. She left right after everything happened. She told me she was relocating because she couldn't stay in the same city after losing a child under her care." Michael exhaled slowly. "She didn't leave," he said. "She was moved, reassigned. The truth was kept hidden." Sandra's chest tightened painfully. "Why would she come now?" she whispered, fear growing with every word. Michael lowered his eyes. "Because she wants to tell you something," he said softly. "Something she wasn't allowed to tell you then, something she has carried for years." Sandra felt faint for a moment. Her body leaned slightly toward Keanu, and he placed his arm around her shoulders, steadying her. He whispered gently into her ear. "You don't have to face anyone alone," he said. "I'm here, I'm not going anywhere." She nodded slowly, leaning into him as if drawing strength from his warmth. Michael walked toward the living room window and peeked through the curtain. A car slowly approached the driveway, its headlights illuminating the front yard. He turned back to Sandra. "That's her," he said softly. Sandra's breath froze. The car stopped, a door opened, soft footsteps approached the house. Sandra shook her head quickly, panic rising again. "I can't do this," she whispered. "I don't know what she's going to say. I don't know if I can handle hearing anything else." Keanu gently lifted her chin, making her meet his eyes. "Listen to me," he said softly. "You are stronger than you think. You survived the worst part alone. Now you're not alone." She closed her eyes, her breath shaky, but she nodded. Slowly, painfully, but she nodded. A knock sounded at the door. This one was gentle, soft, nothing like the knocks earlier. It sounded like someone who carried regret. Sandra straightened slightly, though the fear didn't fade from her eyes. Keanu stood beside her, one arm around her back, supporting her without suffocating her. Michael stepped to the side of the room, giving them space, but staying close enough to help if things became too overwhelming. The knock came again, still soft, still hesitant. Sandra took a breath and whispered, "Open it." Keanu nodded and walked to the door. He opened it slowly. A woman stepped inside the warm light of the house, mid-50s, tired eyes, hands trembling slightly. She looked older than she probably was, as if guilt had aged her more than time ever could. When her gaze landed on Sandra, her lips quivered. "Sandra," she whispered, her voice cracking, "you look just like you did that night. broken, and I've hated myself every day for being part of the reason why." Sandra stared at her, unable to speak, tears gathering in her eyes again. Claire took a careful step inside, glancing at Keanu briefly, then at Michael. She held a small folder in her hands, clutching it tightly like a weight she had carried for years. "I know you don't want to see me," Claire said softly. "You have every right to hate me. I should have told you the truth back then. I should have fought harder. I didn't. And I am so sorry." Sandra looked away, her jaw trembling. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. "Why did you let me believe? Why did you let me think I failed him?" Claire's eyes filled with tears. "Because they threatened to ruin me," she whispered. "The hospital, the administrators, they told me if I said a word about the misdiagnosis, I would lose my career. They said it would destroy me. They said it would destroy them too, and I was a coward. I chose survival over truth, and I have never forgiven myself for that." Sandra's knees shook. Keanu tightened his hold on her. Claire stepped closer and held out the folder. "This is the file they hid," Claire whispered. "The real medical notes, the corrections, the apology they never sent. I've kept it all these years, hoping one day I'd find the courage to give it to you." Sandra stared at the folder, her breath unsteady. Keanu gently guided her to sit on the couch. Claire knelt in front of her, not standing above her but lowering herself to the floor, humbled, remorseful. "I know this won't bring him back," Claire whispered, her voice breaking. "I know it won't erase your pain, but you need to know you were a good mother, better than they ever told you. You didn't fail him. The system failed both of you." A tear slipped down Sandra's cheek, then another, then more. She whispered through her tears, "I held him thinking he was slipping away, and I blamed myself. I thought I didn't do enough. I thought I ran out of time because I wasn't enough." Claire shook her head, tears streaming. "You loved him," she whispered, "and he knew it. He said your name when he passed because he felt your love. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't alone." That broke Sandra's strength completely. She sobbed into her hands, her body trembling. Keanu held her tightly, whispering gentle words that anchored her through the storm. Claire cried too, silently, shoulders shaking with guilt. Michael watched with quiet sadness, knowing this moment was long overdue. After several minutes, Sandra finally lifted her head, her face red and tear-streaked. She looked at Claire with a softness tangled with pain. "Why now?" she whispered. "Why after so many years?" Claire wiped her cheeks. "Because I'm retiring," she said softly. "And because the guilt is killing me. I didn't want to leave this world knowing I let another mother drown in pain because of my silence." Sandra's expression softened, not with forgiveness yet, but with understanding. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she whispered. Claire nodded. "I know," she said, "and I don't expect you to. I only came to tell you the truth." Sandra looked down at the folder again. Slowly, she reached out and took it from Claire's trembling hands. The moment her fingers touched the folder, something inside her shifted. The weight of years of grief, guilt, silence, fear pressed down on her chest, then slowly loosened, as if a lock deep inside her heart had finally turned. Keanu stroked her back gently. "You're not alone anymore," he whispered. She looked up at him, eyes full of pain, but also full of something she hadn't felt in years. "Trust." She breathed in slowly, letting the air fill her lungs properly for the first time in what felt like forever. "I want to move forward," she whispered. "I don't want to live in this darkness anymore." Keanu smiled softly and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Then I'll walk forward with you," he whispered, "every step." Sandra looked at him, overwhelmed. "After everything I told you, you still want to stay," she whispered. He nodded without hesitation. "I want to stay because I care about you. Because I've always cared about you, not the actress, not the image, you." Her breath shook as she whispered back, "I care about you too, more than I ever let myself admit." Keanu gently cupped her face and brought his forehead to hers. It wasn't romantic in a dramatic way. It wasn't rushed. It was soft, gentle, two broken hearts leaning into each other with a quiet promise. Claire and Michael stepped toward the door, understanding they had given her what they came to deliver. Before leaving, Claire whispered, "He would be proud of you." Sandra closed her eyes, letting the words sink deep into her soul. When the door closed behind them, the house fell quiet again. But this time, the silence didn't feel heavy or suffocating. It felt like the beginning of something new, something healing. Sandra leaned into Keanu, her head resting against his chest. "What happens now?" she whispered. Keanu wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. "Now," he whispered, "you stop carrying this pain alone. Now you let yourself heal. Now you let yourself feel loved again." She lifted her gaze to him, her eyes soft but shining with fragile hope. Do you think we still have a chance? After everything? After all the years I stayed silent?" Keanu smiled gently. "I think we've always had a chance," he whispered. "We were just afraid to take it." She let out a shaky breath, half a sob, half a laugh. Then she leaned forward, gently touching her forehead to his again, their breaths mingling. For the first time in years, she felt something warm open inside her. Not fear, not guilt, but peace. And when Keanu wrapped his arms around her and held her like she was something precious he had been waiting for all his life, she finally believed she wasn't broken. She was healing, and she wasn't alone anymore.